Hello. This is Ben, and I'm going to be recording an audiobook today. I in no way profit from this, and I do not claim to have any affiliation with the creation of this book. Okay, so let's begin. Throne of Glass by Sarah J. Maas. Chapter 1. After a year of slavery in the salt mines of Indovier, Silana Sardothian was accustomed to being escorted everywhere in shackles and at sword point. Most of the thousands of slaves in Indovier received similar treatment, though an extra half-dozen guards always walked Selena to and from the mines. That was expected by Adeline's most notorious assassin. What she did not usually expect, however, was a hooded man in black at her side, as there was now. He gripped her arm as he led her through the shining building in which most of Indovier's officials and overseers were housed. They strode down corridors, up flights of stairs, and around until she hadn't the slightest chance of finding her way out again. At least, that was her escort's intention, because she hadn't failed to notice when they went up and down the same staircase within a matter of minutes. Nor had she missed when they zigzagged between levels, even though the building was a standard grid of hallways and stairwells. As if she'd lose her bearings that easily. She might have been insulted if he wasn't trying so hard. They entered a particularly long hallway, silent save for their footsteps. Though the man grasping her arm was tall and fit, she could see nothing of the features concealed beneath his hood. Another tactic meant to confuse and intimidate her. The black clothes were probably a part of it, too. His head shifted in her direction, and Silana flashed him a grin. He looked forward again, his iron grip tightening. It was flattering, she supposed, even if she didn't know what was happening, or why he'd been waiting for her outside the mine shaft. After a day of cleaving rock salt from the innards of the mountain, finding him standing there with 6 guards hadn't improved her mood. But her ears had pricked up when he'd introduced himself to her overseer as Chow Westfall, captain of the Royal Guard, and suddenly the sky loomed, the mountains pushed from behind, and even the earth swelled toward her knees. She hadn't tasted fear in a while. Hadn't let herself taste fear. When she awoke every morning, she repeated the same words. I will not be afraid. For a year, those words had meant the difference between breaking and bending. They had kept her from shattering in the darkness of the mines. Not that she'd let the captain know any of that. Silana examined the gloved hand holding her arm. The dark leather almost matched the dirt on her skin. She adjusted her torn and filthy tunic with her free hand and held in her sigh. Entering the mines before sunrise and departing after dusk, she rarely glimpsed the sun. She was frightfully pale beneath the dirt. It is true that she had been attractive once, beautiful even, but, well, it didn't matter now, did it? They turned down another hallway, and she studied the stranger's finely crafted sword. Its shimmering pommel was shaped like an eagle mid-flight. Noticing her stare, his gloved hand descended to rest upon his golden head. Another smile tugged at the corners of his lips. You're a long way from Rifthold, Captain, she said, clearing her throat. Did you come with the army I heard thumping around earlier? She peered into the darkness beneath his hood, but saw nothing. Still, she felt his eyes upon her face, judging, weighing, testing. She stared right back. The captain of the Royal Guard would be an interesting opponent, maybe even worthy of some effort on her part. Finally, the man raised his sword hand, and the folds of his cloak fell to conceal the blade. As his cloak shifted, she spied the gold wyvern embroidered on his tunic, the royal sealer. What do you care for the armies of Aderlin? He replied. How lovely it was to hear a voice like her own, cool and articulate, even if he was a nasty brute. Nothing, she said, shrugging. He let out a low growl of annoyance. Oh, it'd be nice to see his blood spill across the marble. She'd lost her temper once before. Once, when her first overseer chose the wrong day to push her too hard. She still remembered the feeling of embedding the pickaxe into his gut, and the stickiness of his blood on her hands and face. She could disarm 2 of these guards in a heartbeat. Would the captain fare better than her late overseer? Contemplating the potential outcome, she grinned at him again. Don't you look at me like that, he warned, and his hand drifted back toward his sword. Silana hid her smirk this time. They passed a series of wooden doors that she'd seen a few minutes ago. If she wanted to escape, she simply had to turn left at the next hallway and take the stairs down 3 flights. The only thing all the intended disorientation had accomplished was to familiarize her with the building. Idiots. "Where are we going again?" she asked sweetly, brushing a strand of her matted hair from her face. When he didn't reply, she clenched her jaw. The halls echoed too loudly for her to attack him without alerting the whole building. She hadn't seen where he'd put the key to her irons, and the 6 guards who trailed them would be nuisances, not to mention the shackles. They entered a hallway hung with iron chandeliers. Outside the windows lining the hall, night had fallen, lanterns kindled so bright they offered few shadows to hide in. From the courtyard she could hear the other slaves shuffling around the wooden building where they slept. The moans of agony amongst the clank of chains made a chorus as familiar as the dreary work songs they sang all day. The occasional solo of the whip added to the symphony of brutality Aderlin had created for its greatest criminals, poorest citizens, and latest conquests. While some of the prisoners were people accused of attempting to practice magic, not that they could, given that magic had vanished from the kingdom, these days more and more rebels arrived at Endovier, most primarily one of the last countries still fighting Aderlin's rule. But when she pestered them for news, many just stared at her with empty eyes, already broken. She shuddered to consider what they had endured at the hands of Aderlin's forces. Some days she wondered if they would have been better off dying on the butchering blocks instead, and if she might have been better off dying the night she'd been betrayed and captured too. But she had other things to think about as they continued their walk. Was she finally to be hanged? Sickness quailed in her stomach. She was important enough to warrant an execution from the captain of the royal guard himself, but why bring her inside this building first? At last they stopped before a set of red and gold glass doors so thick that she couldn't see through them. Captain Westfall jerked his chin at the 2 guards standing on either side of the doors, and they stomped their spears in greeting. The captain's grip tightened until it hurt. He yanked Solana closer, but her feet seemed made of lead, and she pulled against him. "You'd rather stay in the mines?" he asked, sounding faintly amused. "Perhaps if I were told what this all was about, I wouldn't feel so inclined to resist." "You'll find out soon enough." Her palms became sweaty. Yes, she was going to die. It had come at last. The doors groaned open to reveal a throne room. A glass chandelier, shaped like a grapevine, occupied most of the ceiling, spitting seeds of diamond fire onto the windows along the far side of the room. Compared to the bleakness outside those windows, the opulence felt like a slap to the face, a reminder of how much they profited from her labor. "In here," the captain of the guard growled, and shoved her with his free hand, finally releasing her. Solana stumbled, her calloused feet slipping on the smooth floor as she straightened herself. She looked back to see another 6 guards appear. 14 guards, plus the captain, the gold royal emblem embroidered on the breast of black uniforms. These were members of the royal family's personal guard, ruthless, lightning-swift soldiers trained from birth to protect and kill. She swallowed tightly. Light-headed and immensely heavy all at once, Solana faced the room. On an ornate redwood throne sat a handsome young man. Her heart stopped as everyone bowed. She was standing in front of the Crown Prince of Aderlin. Chapter 2. "Your Highness," said the captain of the guard. He straightened from a low bow and removed his hood, revealing close-cropped chestnut hair. The hood had definitely been meant to intimidate her into submission during their walk, as if that sort of trick could work on her. Despite her irritation, she blinked at the sight of his face. He was so young. Captain Westfall was not excessively handsome, but she couldn't help finding the ruggedness of his face and the clarity of his golden brown eyes rather appealing. She cocked her head, now cleanly aware of her wretched dirtiness. "This is she?" the Crown Prince of Aderlin asked, and Solana's head whipped around as the captain nodded. Both of them stared at her, waiting for her to bow. When she remained upright, Chow shifted on his feet, and the prince glared at his captain before lifting his chin a bit higher. Bow to him, indeed! If she were bound for the gallows, she would most certainly not spend the last moments of her life in groveling submission. Thundering steps issued from behind her, and someone grabbed her by the neck. Solana only glimpsed crimson cheeks and a sandy mustache before being thrown to the icy marble floor. Pain slammed through her face, light splintering her vision. Her arms ached as her bound hands kept her joints from properly aligning. Though she tried to stop them, tears of pain welled. "That is the proper way to greet your future king," a red-faced man snapped at Solana. The assassin hissed, baring her teeth as she twisted her head to look at the kneeling bastard. He was almost as large as her overseer, clothed in reds and oranges that matched his thinning hair. His obsidian eyes glittered as his grip tightened on her neck. If she could move her right arm just a few inches, she could throw him off balance and grab his sword. The shackles dug into her stomach, and fizzing, boiling rage turned her face scarlet. After a too long moment, the Crown Prince spoke. "I don't quite comprehend why you'd force someone to bow when the purpose of the gesture is to display allegiance and respect." His words were coated with glorious boredom. Silana tried to pivot a free eye to the prince, but could only see a pair of black leather boots against the white floor. "It's clear that you respect me, Duke Parrington, but it's a bit unnecessary to put such effort into forcing Silana Sardothian to have the same opinion. You and I know very well she has no love for my family, so perhaps your intent is to humiliate her." He paused, and she could have sworn his eyes fell on her face. "But I think she's had enough of that." He stopped for another moment, then asked, "Don't you have a meeting with Indovier's treasurer? I wouldn't want you to be late, especially when you came all this way to meet with him." Understanding the dismissal, her tormentor grunted and released her. Silana peeled her cheek from the marble, but lay on the floor until he stood and left. If she managed to escape, perhaps she'd hunt down this Duke Parrington fellow, and return the warmth of his greeting. As she rose, she frowned at the imprint of grit she left behind on the otherwise spotless floor, and at the clank of her shackles echoing through the silent room. But she had been trained to be an assassin since the age of 8, since the day the king of the assassins found her half dead on the banks of a frozen river and brought her to his keep. She wouldn't be humiliated by anything, least of all being dirty. Gathering her pride, she tossed her long braid behind her shoulder and lifted her head. Her eyes met those of the prince. Dorian Heveliard smiled at her. It was a polished smile, and reeked of court-trained charm. Sprawled across the throne, he had his chin propped by a hand, his golden crown glinting in the soft light. On his black doublet, an emblazoned gold rendering of the royal wyvern occupied the entirety of his chest. His red cloak fell gracefully around him in his throne. Yet there was something in his eyes, strikingly blue, the color of the waters of the southern countries, and the way they contrasted with his raven black hair, that made her pause. He was achingly handsome, and couldn't have been older than 20. Princes are not supposed to be handsome. They're sniveling, stupid, repulsive creatures. How unfair of him to be royal and beautiful. She shifted on her feet as he frowned, surveying her in turn. "I thought I asked you to clean her," he said to Captain Westfall, who stepped forward. She'd forgotten there was anyone else in the room. She looked at her rags and stained skin, and she couldn't suppress the twinge of shame. What a miserable state for a girl of former beauty. At a passing glance, one might think her eyes blue or gray, perhaps even green, depending on the color of her clothing. Up close, though, these warring hues were offset by the brilliant ring of gold around her pupils. But it was her golden hair that caught the attention of most, hair that still maintained a glimmer of its glory. In short, Silana Sardothian was blessed with a handful of attractive features that compensated for the majority of average ones, and by early adolescence she discovered that with the help of cosmetics, these average features could easily match the extraordinary assets. But now standing before Dorian Heveliard as little more than a gutter rat. Her face warmed as Captain Westfall spoke. "I didn't want to keep you waiting." The Crown Prince shook his head when Chal reached for her. "Don't bother with the bath just yet. I can see her potential." The prince straightened, keeping his attention on Silana. "I don't believe that we've ever had the pleasure of an introduction, but as you probably know, I'm Dorian Heveliard, Crown Prince of Averlin, perhaps now Crown Prince of most of Erilea." She ignored the surge and crash of bitter emotions that awoke within me. "And you're Silana Sardothian, Averlin's greatest assassin. Perhaps the greatest assassin in all of Erilea." He studied her tensed body before he raised his dark, well-groomed brows. "You seem a little young." He rested his elbows on his thighs. "I've heard some rather fascinating stories about you. How do you find Indovier after living in such excess and Rifthold?" "Arrogant ass. I couldn't be happier," she crooned as her jagged nails cut into her palms. "After a year, you seem to be more or less alive. I wonder how that's possible, when the average life expectancy in these mines is a month. Quite a mystery, I'm sure." She bowed her eyelashes and readjusted her shackles as if they were lace gloves. The Crown Prince turned to his captain. "She has somewhat of a tongue, doesn't she? And she doesn't sound like a member of the rabble." "I should hope not," Silana interjected. "Your Highness," Charles Westfall snapped at her, "What?" Silana asked. "You will